Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, Jonny Does Carnivore. At this video, we've got Coach Stephen from the UK Carnivore, who's agreed to come on my channel and analyse my blood results. So I've been carnivore for 1 year now, and last week, me and Stephen did a video on his channel, which we just talked about that journey as a whole. Stephen, thanks so much for coming and agreeing to do this. Blood tests are just a bunch of numbers to someone like me, but you can make sense of them all, and you've written books and done countless episodes on your channel explaining to viewers what they all mean.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me on. They are just numbers, by the way, and I'm much more interested in symptoms. So you can have a perfect set of numbers, and if you've got terrible symptoms, the numbers are sort of meaningless, really. That's a very important thing to remember before we start. And also the normal ranges are not optimal ranges, and they're certainly not relevant to the way we eat. So most normal ranges for blood tests are based on somebody eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates. And physiology for some of the numbers, as you call it, will be different because we're eating less carbs. So a classic example would be many people go, oh, my T3 is tanked. We use that as an example. Well, T3 is lower when you eat carnivore, much lower, because we don't need so much T3, because we're not needing the T3 to function in the process of glycolysis. So if you're eating a lot of carbs, there's a thing called glycolysis, which is all about breaking down carbohydrates, making energy. And T3 is needed to get the pyruvate, which is part of the process, across the mitochondrial membrane, which is the sort of energy of the cell, mitochondria. Well, if you're not needing that because you're not eating lots and lots of carbs, you don't need that pyruvate to be moved across, then you don't need lots of T3. And if you have no symptoms relating to low T3, allegedly low T3, then everything's fine and dandy. I mean, just before we start, if I was doing you a report, I would actually say, despite a few things out of range, your blood tests indicate sort of overall robust health. So,
Great.
Red blood cells, people call this the complete blood count. All of these have got a little green thing here. And in the main, when it comes to red blood cells and white blood cells, they're pretty much the same whether you're carnivore or keto or low carb or standard American diet or vegan. Yours are all green here. So many people also call this, in America particularly, they call it the complete blood count or CBC. That's really good. I'm only going to talk about the ones that might worry people, because they've got two little crosses. When you get to kidney health, there's three things that are always looked at. The bottom one here, eGFR, the little e means it's estimated. And the estimation is based on a creatinine, which is the waste product of protein metabolism. So when you start eating more protein, creatinine goes up, and it has an inverse relationship. So eGFR goes down, and it tends to worry people. But you can get another test. This is, broadly speaking, you don't really need to do this because yours is 86, that's the filtration rate. You want it to be over 60, sort of about 120 is about the top you can get, really. Well, if you have, and this is for your viewers, if you have one that's lower, let's say it's 57 or something like that, you can get a different test called the cystatin C test, and that's a more accurate measure of your filtration rate. And if you get that test, and I've recommended this a few times in the last decade, the filtration rate that you were worried about becomes something you're not worried about. And it can be quite stark. It can be, reading as 40 here, but when you get the cystatin C test, it's 112 or something like that. So now then, you have slightly higher levels of urea. Now, urea is going to go up because it's slightly higher in our way of eating, because that's another waste product directly related to protein metabolism or protein breakdown and getting rid of ammonia and all those sort of things. So it goes slightly higher. Now, people have seen me before will know that I say this. None of this is controversial. If you go on a nursing website that talks about bloods, everything I've just said, they will always acknowledge. First thing to do, if any of these don't look right, is ask the patient, are you eating slightly more protein than normal? Now, because you've only got one out of range, the other two look really good. That's even less of a worry. I don't think that is a problem because I see it all the time in carnivore and keto.
You say it is around the 10, quite typical
10.3
for a carnivore eater.
Yeah, for someone that's eating carnivore, that's in fact, this is one of the things. If I had even more data, I've only maybe got about 1,000 people at the moment that have done bloods, just over, It's not enough data to suggest optimal ranges for this way of eating, but I'm sure if I can get a bit more traction, some other influencers interested, maybe people like Dr. Paul Mason, maybe we could pull our data together and actually look at a range that is relevant to this cohort, which is people that eat more protein, less carbohydrates. So that would be magic, actually. So let's have a look at the next thing. So you've got liver health, you've got bilirubin, ALP, ALT, GGT. You don't really need to get into what each one stands for, but ALT, alanine aminotransferase, is slightly elevated. Again, this is a common thing if you are working out. It can also be down to your hydration status. These numbers can be slightly skewed. In the context of all of these liver health markers, it's not a big concern. If it's slightly elevated, while all other liver markers are okay, then we tend not to worry. So AST, like I say, ALP, bilirubin, GGT are all within normal ranges. So it's normally not indicative of a severe liver dysfunction. It's normally something to do with a few things. You're going to laugh in a minute. Slightly higher.
Well, one thing I might just add, sorry to interrupt you there, because you mentioned hydration, and I'm not usually dehydrated, quite conscious of drinking plenty of water. That morning I went for this blood test. I thought I had some water in the car. It was a nightmare to get to the place. I hadn't really drunk anything for like 3 hours. And the lady said, "Oh, your blood's quite dark. Are you a bit dehydrated?" And I said, "To be honest, I haven't drunk much this morning." Yeah.
Well, there you go. I mean, I didn't know that. So that sort of backs up. But just for other people, fat diets, if you have slightly higher fat, this can go up a little bit, especially if you're transitioning. Medications can make it go up a little bit. You know, even things like protein powders, supplements can do that as well. So it's not a big problem. Muscle activity is normally the one, because most people that are doing this way of eating start to exercise as well. So we've got your proteins, albumin, globulin. This is all good. And then we have one that very often confuses people, which is the HbA1c. HB stands for hemoglobin, and this is the average amount of glycation of your red blood cells' hemoglobin component over a certain period. Now, they don't put a little e in front of this, and they should, because it's estimated. So this is looking good for you. So it's not overly a worry, but just for people that are watching the channel and think, oh, mine's gone up or mine's low, is there a problem? When I started phlebotomy way over 10 years ago, so I'm 60 now, I'm not going to give up. I've been doing it a long time. I remember that I was told if there's a very low HbA1c, it might be because red blood cells aren't lasting very long. And that person could be what's called hemolytic anemic, which is that sort of diagnostic name. And what I found about 2, 3 years ago, when CGMs were very popular, there were people saying, wow, I don't understand. My HbA1c has gone up, but my daily average blood glucose from my CGM and from my finger pricking doesn't show this. And that's because they're actual readings, not an estimation. And it got me thinking, and I'm not the only one, I think Ben Bickman and Paul Mason both do this, that start to look at the life of the red blood cells, because everything else looked good. So some people get fasted glucose testing, insulin testing, C-peptide testing, and all of that looked good. So why would the HbA1c be high? Well, I'm going back to what I was told. If it's artificially low, red blood cells die too soon. So if it's artificially high, they probably live in too long. So you can get a separate test, and I'm not suggesting you do, Johnny, because yours is fine anyway. You can get what's called a reticulocyte count, which looks at how long your red blood cells are living, or more to the point, how much is the production from the bone marrow of immature red blood cells. It gives you a good marker for that. And every time somebody does that, they don't worry anymore about their HbA1c. It's a very bad marker. There's a thing called the fructosamine, which has nothing to do with fructose, believe it or not. It's still about glycated proteins, which gives you a 3-week average, which might be slightly better. But it's certainly nothing to worry about if your actual daily blood glucose looks good, your fasted insulin looks good if you get blood tests, if you get a C-peptide measurement done, which is the production of insulin or a proxy marker, you shouldn't be too worried. So this is a terror. I mean, I'm a specialist practitioner in diabetes and obesity, and that's something I've done for 15 years. This used to be the be-all and end-all, the HbA1c, but now there's much nuance, especially as we've got more and more carnivore focused and more keto and low-carb focused, and red blood cells lasting longer. There's no downside to that. It's actually good for the body. 60 million red blood cells are made every single minute, and it can reduce to a turnover down to 120 million. There's still a lot of new red blood cells being made, but that's a relevant number for later. So did that make sense? I mean, basically, your red blood cells have hemoglobin in, and it carries around iron, and it carries around oxygen. This is very layman's. And sugar sticks to it. So the longer it's in your red blood cell circulation or in your bloodstream, the more sticky bits of glucose are going to be on it. So that number goes up. Because we're looking at people with that range, when we look at the ideal ranges, that's people eating lots of carbohydrates and consuming lots of glucose. 45 to 65% of their intake is sticky glucose, basically. So if you reduce it, it doesn't make any sense that your HbA1c would go up, because there's less likelihood of glucose sticking to protein. Now that's where you think, well, hang on a minute, if it's going up, that can't be right because I'm eating less glucose. So that's why it's important to look at your actual daily readings rather than estimation. Because this might be estimating, depends on the lab. This might be saying, oh, your red blood cells should last sort of 90 to 120 days. In fact, they're lasting 150. So it throws the calculation out completely and utterly. But like I say, I mean, if you've got questions, if you're watching, and it's not you, Jonny, but other people, if they've got questions, put them in the comments. Do a second, like a follow-up. Right. Then we get into cholesterol. There should be a little E in front of LDL cholesterol because, well, firstly, that's not cholesterol. That's a low-density lipoprotein, which contains cholesterol and other lipids and other things, like triglycerides, vitamin E, fat-soluble vitamins. And it's got a little X there, which we'll come back to. You've got triglycerides there, and you've got HDL, high-density lipoproteins and triglycerides. And one of the things, and I'm going to show you some other thing, I'm going to come off this screen share and go to a different one in a second. The ratio between these two tends to be a much better indicator of cardiovascular risk, for want of a better word. Not the be-all and end-all, but this is what we want. In real basic terms, your triglycerides to be less than your HDL. That's really good. Now, when we look at this, LDL cholesterol, is cholesterol dangerous? Well, firstly, it's a molecule that's in HDL as well, by the way, which is apparently the good cholesterol. And it's also going around your system in your veins and in your arteries. That same molecule, that same particle, the LDL particle, which contains cholesterol, is circulating in your arteries and in your veins. But it doesn't cause any plaques in veins, but it does in arteries. But it's the same cholesterol. So that's the first thing. Secondly, is it anywhere in the arteries? No, it tends to be in high pressure areas of the artery. So it's not everywhere. It's predictable patterns of formation. And also where there's bifurcations, that's where they split into two. So one artery becomes two arteries, like when you look at a tree. And it's also where there's what's called laminar flow absence. So the blood, if it flows nicely, it's called a laminar flow. But if it's turbulent, you'll get a plaque. So it's not cholesterol, it's the situation that's causing a problem. Turbulent blood and high pressure, bifurcations in an artery. And it's also, there's no actual science that says high levels of LDL causes heart disease. There is no actual causal evidence. It's only associations, and even the associations are bad. I just want to quickly show you one thing to do with this, and people can get this if they want the LDL studies. I've got a PDF, and we'll just do one little graph, which is this one, and it just shows along the bottom levels of LDL cholesterol going up along the bottom, and your hazard ratio for all-cause mortality, what you're going to die of, going up here. So it starts at 1, which is unusual for these sort of graphs. So that's because it's still 1 death per person. So that makes sense. And as you can see, when you get to about 120 milligrams per deciliter, that seems to be like a sweet spot. If you start lowering cholesterol, your hazard ratio goes up. Goes up to almost twice as bad, especially once you get past lowering beyond 60. But the higher cholesterol, well, you can go from 120, 130, 140, right up to 180 here, and there doesn't seem to be any issue. Maybe it's a slight issue when you get up to 300, but these dotted lines are your areas of confidence or confidence intervals. So what it's actually saying is if it's below 1 death per person, it might even be protective. It might not, but it could be. On the other side, where you're lowering it, it doesn't look like there's much protection at all. It's mainly sort of in the risky area. Let's go back. Inflammatory markers. This one's called C-Reactive protein, high sensitive, high sensitivity. Now, this is a systemic marker of inflammation. The protein is released when there is inflammation in the body, and the higher, the worse the inflammation. Now, this is another thing to talk about because the range is less than 3. Well, there's no context there. So if it was 4, does that mean it's really bad? Well, I've had people that have had this in triple figures. They've been in the hundreds. If you were 4, you'd have that red cross next to it. But is that bad compared to someone who's, 104,
And it's the context, isn't it? It's how are they presenting? And presumably the ones with 100 haven't all been on their deathbed saying, I feel dreadful and terrible.
No, 100, they might have joint aches and pains.
Maybe 100 might be high, yeah.
Yeah, and that, just going back to LDL, that's a good thing you just said there, Jonny, because if someone comes to me and they're pretty poorly, and they're on blood pressure meds and they're on metformin, this is a real sort of scenario. They're overweight, they don't sleep, they've got a lot of anxiety, they've got lots of cravings. And 3 months later, they're off their blood pressure meds, they're off their diabetic meds, and I've got loads of success stories that show this. Their body composition is great, their sleep is great. If you was to sort of have a little graph of all the numbers, so the blood pressure has come down, the blood glucose has come down, their sleep quality has gone up, their anxiety levels have come down. So all these things are all good. Maybe, how good their skin has gone up, and LDL has gone up. And you think, well, if all these markers have gone to sort of levels that indicate this health, why would there be this outlier? Why would that go up when all the other ones are improving? So it doesn't make any sense in the context of, like you say, arbitrary. It's thinking. It's absolutely embedded thinking that LDL being high is a problem. Where I don't think there isn't any actual evidence of that, and I certainly see evidence that we've been duped. But I don't want to go over the same old things. But it all started with feeding rabbits cholesterol in vegetable oil, and then fraud with the 2 researchers from Harvard being paid $50,000 each to say that fat is the problem, not sugar, and all this. So I think it's all, I don't want to go over the same old things. And then we get into gout risk, which is a terrible way of talking about uric acid. This is a rabbit hole you could go down. But anyway, yours is fine. Many people think the uric acid is associated with gout. I've seen thousands of these blood tests, and sometimes people have terrible gout and very low uric acid. And I've had people with very high, allegedly, uric acid and no gout. To me, commonsensical, it doesn't seem to be that nailed on, but there is an association. But what I would say is, if people want to go down the rabbit hole, you could look up what's called uricase. So it's like uric acid, but it's uricase. And look at that enzyme, which humans stopped producing many years ago. And it was a way of degrading uric acid. And I think if the whole population of the planet has a gene that suddenly switches off, it's probably for a good reason. So we're probably meant to have higher levels of uric acid anyway. It is an antioxidant. Right, okay. So now we've got iron status.
Yeah.
And I think this is an interesting one. So serum iron, this is actually iron that's circulating. And it's good. Total iron binding capacity, that's very good. Transferrin saturation, I'll come back to UIBC in a second. Transfer, that's very good. And ferritin's very good. The transferrin, as the name sort of implies, is transferring ferric ferrous iron. It's the protein that moves stuff around, and the saturation is how much of this protein that moves it around is saturated. So there's lots of facility for you to have spare capacity to move iron around. And then you get into that one that's got the little red mark, which is the unsaturated iron binding capacity. That's what it stands for. And it measures the reserve capacity of transferrin that is available to bind iron. So what it's basically saying is you are measuring the unoccupied spaces on transferrin to be moved around. So imagine that protein is like a little bus with seats in. You have loads of capacity to move iron around. That's all that is saying. Well, that's got a little X against it. But again, in the context of the panel, it looks really good. And also, it's only out of range by 0.8. The range is 12 to 43 The range is 12 to 43, and you're 43.8. So, again, not a big problem. Okay, so and then we got to minerals. We've only looked at magnesium, and that's in range. The minerals are very tightly regulated. So I'm not overly worried about that at all. Then we've got folate, B12, and vitamin D, which is more of a hormone. So folate, that can be lower on this way of eating, but is it a problem? Do you have any symptoms of alleged low folate?
And what sort of symptoms would low folate
be?
Do
you feel pale? Have you got bleeding gums? Are you fatigued?
No, not at all.
That's probably not a problem then. See, this is the thing. I mean, folate is a B vitamin, right? And you need it for DNA synthesis and cell repair, which is why if you're not taking enough, I've got to be careful here because you do need folate if you say you're pregnant. But I wouldn't say you need to supplement.
Is this where something like eating organ meats can just help raise that number a bit?
This is why people do that. But I mean, there's folate in eggs.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So again, I don't see any symptoms of low folate in you, like you say. So
yeah. I mean, I don't eat many eggs either, if I'm honest. I stick to mainly beef.
Yeah, but if you're not got, I mean, you don't look anemic. You don't smell fatigued. You don't look pale. You don't have memory problems, do you? Not that you can remember. A lot of oral problems, like I say, bleeding gums, that tends to be the other symptoms. So if you haven't got symptoms, is it a worry?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that. Then you've got vitamin B12, which is adequate, isn't it?
I'd say so.
Yeah, so we don't really need to go into that.
Yeah.
I think most people would know you'd have adequate levels of B12 this way of eating. And you've got vitamin D, which has got a cross against it. Now, I've done tests on this for myself and people, and you can boost that easily with a little bit more sunlight, a little bit of supplementation. Vitamin D and K2 help with calcium absorption and getting calcium into the right areas. It could be something that you could look into.
Yeah.
Don't know how you feel about that.
You and I, Stephen, we live in this rainy climate called the UK. When I took this blood test last month, I think it was, there had literally been no sun for the previous 6 months leading up to it. So, I mean, because that, as in the summer months, it was great. And recently it's been not too bad. Would that number move up and down?
Yes.
On a sort of a 6 monthly basis, would you say? Like if I was to do it now, having had loads of sun in the last month, that have improved?
Well, yes and no. You can get sun exposure, but if you're not eating essential fats, then the synthesis of vitamin D will be lower. You do need to eat as well, and you need cholesterol for that to happen if it's going through your skin. I would always suggest having K2 with it as well, because when the calcium is being moved along, you want it not to be sticking to the sides of your artery walls, and you want it to get into the bone. So K2 assists that with a thing called osteocalcin, and there's a thing called MGP protein as well, which activates one of those Osteocalcium, make sure it gets into the bone.
Yeah.
You don't need to supplement with that. The K2 is the thing that activates it, and the MGP is the matrix glia protein, and that stops the calcium going into soft tissues. So it's sort of like a bouncer sort of thing. Make sure calcium gets along in the right situation. I wouldn't necessarily say you need to supplement. You could supplement and just see how you feel, but I don't see that as a problem, because overall, like I say, everything looks pretty good.
Great. Okay. So is K2 a supplement though? You couldn't find that in food?
Well, yeah, you can get that from cheese.
Oh, you can?
K2,
Okay.
cheese and dairy is a very good source.
Okay. But that's interesting. Maybe we could just touch on organ meats to increase folate and a bit of dairy, which I don't eat, to increase a bit of K2, which will then help vitamin D absorption. But yeah.
But you can also get K2 from chicken legs and chicken wings and
Okay.
pork. There's loads of things. Easy to come to mind straight away. And even grass-fed animals, ruminants will have it as well. So butter, there's loads of ways of getting right, which is why I was being quite laid back about it. And here's your last thing, which looks at thyroid. I mentioned T3 tanking for some people. It hasn't. It's reasonably low, but TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. That looks pretty good. That's in range. Free T3, that's in range, and so is 3-thyroxine, which is T4, which is like the storage form. This is quite a good panel. You could have added, don't worry, you didn't need to, but if you were worried about your thyroid, you could have had reverse T3. That would always be good. And you can sometimes do the antibodies, TPO and TG, thyroid globulin and thyroid peroxidase, antibodies which sort of show if you've got an autoimmune condition. And the reason I say sort of is because even that has context with this way of eating. But anyway, that's a clean bill of health for your thyroid. And like I say, you might have had a lower level of T3 and been worried. You could have gone under that 3.1. I personally wouldn't have worried because you're keto or carnivore. Then your testosterone is pretty good as well. Mine went up about 50% once I went carnivore, and that was at age 55. So all in all, I think they're really good bloods.
Right. Well, that's what you want to hear.
Yes.
You're all clear. From a carnivore doctor or a pro-carnivore phlebotomist, because if you were to read the extracts from the company that administered that blood test, it suggests a different story. Should we read that for fun? It's just hilarious reading their little summary at the top, which basically says you're dying.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can screen share it if you want.
If you feel it's useful for people to know, yeah, that's true.
Because,
that's true.
We're just trying to be helpful. So, yeah. So kidney, it says you have a high level of urea. This could be caused by dehydration. So there you go. As well as being eating a high protein meal or heavy exercise. So we're there already. What we said. Excess urea isn't healthy to maintain. So please hydrate really well. That doesn't mean drinking loads and loads of water. It means drinking the appropriate amount. Because you go the other way. If you've got clear urine, you are drinking too much. You need a certain parts per million in your urine. A thing called specific gravity, which is a posh way of saying make sure that your urine is sort of straw-colored. It's a waste product. It shouldn't be clear, your urine. But anyway, it's saying that the EGFR, kidney filtration rate, is low normal. As we haven't had a previous result for you, it isn't possible to comment on whether this was better previously or not. So that's okay. I think that reads okay to me. So the liver, you have high level of alanine transferase. This can indicate inflammation within the liver and has many causes. So they mentioned prescription medications, heavy exercise. We talked about that. Use of supplements to raise testosterone and obesity. If you're feeling unwell with new or unexpected symptoms, I would suggest you share your result with your GP. Otherwise, I recommend a repeat test. I don't think that's too bad, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think they mentioned what we talked about, medications, exercise, use of supplements. I didn't go across that, but yeah, sometimes that can cause a problem. Cholesterol, your total cholesterol is significantly higher and your level of harmful LDL, you see, that's a pejorative term.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we know it's harm? And non-HDL are too significantly high. It is essential that you address your diet ASAP, as such levels of cholesterol increase your cardiovascular risk. Well, it may increase your risk. There's no proof of that. Please reduce your intake of red meat and revert to a balanced diet. Low in saturated fats. Increase your intake of fibre, vegetables and fruit. There's no science behind any of that. So, but that's the duty of care. That's what they have to tell you.
That is the mantra. Yeah. I know. I get it. I get it.
And that's the current guidelines. So they're doing what they should do, which is tell you that. And I think it would be interesting if you wanted to write to them with all the LDL studies and so, but they won't change. So we have to accept that. Your iron stores are at the upper end of normal. Consider reducing your iron-rich sources to prevent ferritin becoming high. But it wasn't really. It's pretty panel, actually. And you've had plenty of capacity as well for more iron, which shows that the ferritin is available, but it's not got iron plugged into it. So I don't think that matters. Folate, you have low serum folate. I recommend increasing your intake of folate-rich foods, such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, peas, chickpeas, and brown rice. Notice the complete absence of protein, folate-rich, foods like eggs, which we mentioned, cheese, which we can do, pasture-raised red meat, not there at all.
Unbelievable.
But it did say...
how did our ancestors survive without broccoli, Brussels sprouts, chickpeas, brown rice? How did they survive ice ages for millions of years?
Yep. Well, broccoli wasn't around, was it? Brussels sprouts, asparagus, peas, chickpeas, brown rice. I'd never have touched brown rice in a million years. Just talk about the symptoms: pins and needles, weakness, mouth ulcers, tongue redness, soreness, unexpected, suddenly disturbed vision, which you haven't got any of those.
I haven't got any of those,
Yeah. You could say, well, if it's low, why am I not getting the things? Yeah. So, right. You'll be, if it's high, if you're taking supplements, consider stopping. By the way, they're still in range. And your vitamin D shows that you have a vitamin D insufficiency. This can cause tiredness, aches and pains, poor memory, and difficulties concentrating. Do you have all those?
No, I have the opposite. I got rid of aches and pains and a bit of brain fog and tiredness by coming on this diet.
Yeah.
The exact opposite of that.
Yeah. So it's like, let's have a look. Let's go to the next page. We've got the doctor's name there. I don't really want to do that. That's not fair. So I'll just read it. Jonathan, it seems that unfortunately your current diet is not offering you benefit. Your cholesterol level is concerning. Please revert to a nutritionally balanced diet as soon as possible. And it's, you're right. It's a little bit scary, but it doesn't make any sense.
No, exactly. It could scare them out of me. I've been doing this for a year. I'm beyond being scared about what the mainstream sort of says. I've read listened to enough podcasts and saw enough YouTube videos and read enough articles by pro-carnivore doctors and neurosurgeons and people like yourself, and just hundreds of thousands of actual people doing it, which counts for something. People always forget that, that was why I was prepared to take the leap of faith in the first place. I was coming from a place where I had autoimmune issues and didn't feel great. And sure enough, within a week or two, I started to feel fantastic. And then it all made sense. And I read up all the corruption and our ancestral way of eating. But all the pieces of the puzzle came together. So I'm beyond being scared away by mainstream medical advice, albeit I recognize not everyone is trying to deceive. My dad, who's a doctor, we spoke about this last week, he's not trying to deceive you by saying you should eat fibre and veg. He's just from a school of thought that, he's been taught that is necessary and that is what he should be promoting. So he's just trying to do the right thing. But so it's not disinformation, it's misinformation from some. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's not nefarious. It's not trying to harm you.
Yeah.
They really believe that that's good advice, sadly. But you can only go on what you're told if you're taught something. This is why I didn't go further in my honours degree in physiology and health sciences, is because I kept saying these studies, they don't match up with the abstract and the conclusion. And it was frustrating because I'm critical about the facts. I like the facts. And if they don't make any sense, so for instance, like we talked about the HbA1c, if your average blood glucose from your actual blood is not high every single day, and you then get a calculation that says it is, over the last 30 days, the last 3 months, it's been high, you can say, well, I categorically know that's not true. So something must be wrong. Now, yeah, it could be your equipment, could be your CGM. So you have to rule that out. And that's what I did with a lot of people. I got them to double check with their finger pricking machine as well. It's like, well, that machine says it's good, and this machine says it's good. It's unlikely they're both wrong, so the HbA1c must be wrong. But then when you've done that, say, 10 different people that have come to you, and they all say the same thing, and this is what I don't understand, why maybe the doctors aren't listening, because they must be having maybe that sort of thing happen to them as well. But anyway, for me, it was like, well, there's a thing here, here's a trend. All these people I absolutely trust are telling me the same thing. And some people, I did it face-to-face because that was before the lockdown and I used to do the clinics. And it's like, wow, it's got to be wrong. HbA1c, it's got to be reading wrong, and it's got to be a reason why that is not right. It's very unreliable marker. Very, very unreliable. It's not if you're eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates, but it is if you're low carb, keto, or carnivore. Simple as that. So when you get these broad statements from doctors in your bloods, and I love MediChecks, and I really think they're a great lab, they're just doing what they have to do. I do think it will change. I'm training ChatGPT as we speak, and it is beginning to sort of bring up those things in answers.
Oh, so good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, because I think sometimes we can all get a bit despondent and disheartened with the fact that these nutritional guidelines stay the way they are, despite all the data showing almost the reverse. But if you're somewhat hopeful, that gives me hope as well. But I think it is very much a grassroots, bottom-up movement almost, where people have just got to keep going to that, keep trying things like carnivore, keto, and keep confronting their doctors and keep asking difficult questions and keep explaining how they feel and how they're improving all the time, and ask them to justify how it is that if they haven't eaten fibre in 10 years, that they're still coping just fine. It's not an essential nutrient.
That's it.
And there's others as well, vitamin C and all the rest of it.
We don't need so much vitamin C on this way of eating. I mean, that's another one, because we get heme iron direct, but vegetarians and vegans get their iron as non-heme iron. Yeah. And to convert non-heme to heme, you need vitamin C ferroreductase to be fed lots of vitamin C, and that breaks down the Fe3+, which is the non-heme, down to Fe2+. So you need vitamin C to convert non-heme to heme iron. That's basically what I'm saying. Well, we don't need that, so we don't need that much vitamin C.
I just add one last thing, if you've got a minute. It's iodine. I've seen a couple of videos by the likes of Dr. Ken Berry talking about iodine. My understanding was in eggs, fresh caught fish, shrimp or lobster, and potentially the organs of cows would give you sufficient iodine amounts. But I don't actually eat that much fish, if any, and I don't eat any organs, and I don't eat a lot of dairy. But what would the symptoms of low iodine be? I don't seem to have any negative symptoms, so should I just carry on as I am?
Well, I was going to see if I could get the recommended daily allowance.
Yeah, and
right. I mean, let's get into the whole thing about iodine then. So why is it needed? The functional units of the thyroid, they contain a thing called colloid, which is just a posh name for a fluid with bits in it, basically. And iodine you ingest, and then once you start to metabolize it, it becomes iodide, and it goes into the functional units, and that's where the TG and the TPO work together. That's where you also need a bit of selenium and also some fats to make thyroid hormone. So that's his role. That's iodine's role. Now, many people don't talk about what's called the iodine clearance test. This can tell you whether you're deficient or not and save you a whole lot of money on supplements. And this is where you either take a tablet or a drink which contains a certain amount of iodine, just to make the sums easy. Let's say it's 100 units, which is why I had to look up, because I want to talk about UK and USA so people know the differences. But anyway, so you take a tablet, or you take this drink. Let's say you take a tablet. Now, one of the easiest things to say if you're deficient in iodine is, and this actually happened to me, you then text me from that place and say, I must be deficient because I feel amazing after I've taken this tablet. So that is one of the very basic tests that you can do. But yeah, what actually happens, and that's rare, that's a one-off, that one happened once. So they were obviously very deficient. But the iodine clearance test then looks at your urine over 24 hours and it sees how much you've excreted. Now, if you don't need the iodine, you basically excrete it. Not obviously the whole 100 units within 24 hours, but a certain percentage. And you can work out from that percentage if this person is deficient. So, let's say 0 was excreted. We're pretty much nailed on. You've got a deficiency in iodine. And if 100 was excreted, well, you're fine. You're eating way more than you need because you've excreted 100. So that's a test people don't talk about. The excretion part of it is why supplementing with it isn't that problematic, because if you have too much, we excrete it in our urine. I'm not talking about over supplementing, by the way. Still got to be sensible. I've got my Stem Enhance here, which I take, which is the only supplement I take, that one there. But if I took a whole tub, that's me being an idiot. That's too much. So you've still got to follow the guidelines on the drops and whatever. So the RDA in the States is, they haven't done it for me. In the UK, let's have a look. It is slightly different, actually.
And the UK, I would imagine, has sufficient levels of iodine in the soil because we're an island nation, wet, damp. So.
Yeah, well, it's got here that you were looking at. Lost it now. Oh, yeah, it's got life stages. That's why. So if you're just an adult, 15 years plus, you are looking at micrograms per day, 140 micrograms per day in the UK.
Yeah.
And if you're an adult it's 150. The reason I wanted to say that is that just shows that it's different from region to region. So you can't say this is what you need to do. You need firstly that. So, right, if you have a deficiency, also there will be symptoms.
Yeah.
So we're going to say the same old things.
Yeah.
The biggest one is, the goiter, where you get like a big lump in your neck. Hypothyroidism, where you're not making enough thyroid hormone. You're very fatigued, very lethargic. You get unexplained weight gain, cold intolerance, So if you're thinking about the thyroid, have you got the symptoms? Have you got poor memory? Are you depressed? Do you have a low mood? Slow reflexes, reaction times, those sort of things. Dry skin, brittle nails, all the stuff, slower heart rate. So you've got to look at that. And you can get plenty of iodine from, like you say, fish. So that's good. Shellfish, seaweed, dairy, milk, cheese, yogurt, eggs, chicken, beef, pork. It all has it. So don't buy into the thing that, you can't get it unless you've got organ meats. Organ meats do have it. It's not that great in organ meats. So I think eating this way, it's very unlikely you will have a deficiency. If you can tolerate fish and like fish, I would also include fish. I think that's good for omega-3s and other things as well. And EPA, DHA, those sort of things, which are good for brain health. So it's a thing you can test for, the iodine clearance test.
Yeah.
It's a thing you can look at your symptoms to see if you need it. Yeah. And it's also a thing you can get from this diet without fish. Like I say, with eggs. If you can't tolerate eggs, you can still get it from chicken, beef and pork. You can get it from organ meats. So there's plenty of sources.
Well, yeah, no, that's great. That's good to know. And if anyone's out, listening and has some of those symptoms, then easy way to address them. It's funny, isn't it, how most symptoms can be alleviated by just sticking to those foods we've always been eating.
We're already eating, yes.
For 2 or 3 million years. Funny that. Don't actually need a supplement or need to go astray. That's really helpful. I think that's everything from my end. That you've been really generous with your time and you've gone through my blood tests line at a time. All I want to say is a huge thank you, and hopefully it's been really helpful for other people as well. You just want to make sense of their blood tests. Thank you, basically.
It's been my pleasure, Jonny. Thank you for the time coming onto my channel, talking about your improvements in your health. I appreciated that. And it's been a pleasure, actually.
That's fine. Okay. Well, we'll leave that there. Brilliant.